Distortion is probably one of the most important post-processing techniques to learn and excel at in today's dubstep industry. Over the last decade, there's been a trend to get heavier and more distorted basses. With the successful release of Subtronic's new album, That's Rack, figured, hey, this would be a good time to talk about it since everyone and their sister is going to be looking up YouTube videos on how to Subtronic's bass. Maybe I should do a video on the... No, never mind. No, we're staying focused. Today, I'm teaching you everything you need to know on how to get that crunchy, distorted bass like the pros, Excision, Company, Subtronics, Sullivan King, name any headliner in the Brostep industry. This is one thing they are doing right, and you need to understand it. Without further ado...
Bust it!
Alright, so you guys heard the intro, you heard that crunchy bass. I want to show you how to get that really clean, distorted bass sound in your tracks to kind of sound like, you know, everyone else, rather than someone being like, you sound like a 2017 preset junkie by Virtual Riot. Which, how many times have you heard people say that when you started producing? We all have. It's all good. That being said, we need to cover one thing real quick, and that's understanding the fundamentals of distortion. And yes, it'll be quick. Promise for you, everyone that thinks they understand everything about distortion, I promise you don't, but we need to understand this fundamental first. So let's talk about what distortion really is, first off. And we're going to explain this with a simple sine wave, and I'm going to pull up Spectrum here as well. So we just have a simple sine, there's no post-processing, as you can see, and it sounds like this. And for anyone that may not be able to hear this, it's because you might need headphones because it's only going to be sub. Okay. You can see we have a single harmonic. Now I'm going to boost this up and you're going to see all these ridges start going up. These are going to be your harmonics, aka distortion. So watch as I turn it up. See all the peaks growing here. This is what distortion does. Creates a lot more high end as well, because harmonics become shorter and shorter as you go up the scale, log scale, and you're overall going to get a lot more noise up top. For a sub that had nothing, we got a lot of noise when we boosted it all the way up. So the logical thing is understanding how distortion works to use it to your benefits, and that'll make sense a little bit later. Just stick with me. So I'm sure you've heard this famous sound before. I'm just going to turn on a sine wave 4 octaves above it, and I'm just going to put it here. Real quick pause. If you are liking the content and my teaching style, please feel free to like the video so I know this is a good teaching style for you, and hit the subscribe button if you want to see new tutorials as I release them weekly. I'm also trying to grow my Instagram currently, and if you want to help me do that, it takes 10 seconds. It'll be linked down below. You can go follow me on Instagram and then shoot me a message saying you're from YouTube, and I'll send you some sample pack goodies just as a thank you. And I'm just going to play this real quick, and I'm sure you guys have heard this before. The classic dubstep synth. All that is distortion with two sine waves together. You take out the distortion, and you have this. And that's what the power distortion does. So we can use that to our benefits in understanding why that happens. If we take away the low end here and distort it, it takes low end energy to get distorted to get this fat sound we want. And let me further explain this. So we have a bass here that I just made, a rhythm synth. Sounds like this. Super basic, just a square going into a saw, a little post-processing, nothing really crazy. I wanted to make a simple sound, right? And if you distort that together with a sub bass, which is just a sub with kick tight on it, sounds like this, without kick tight, you can get just a very crunchy bass. Now we're not over distorting this part necessary, but we're distorting stuff together. And what I find people trying to do is blowing out one portion like this, when in reality they don't need to do that. They just need to learn how to distort stuff together, and you need a low end. You can do something clean like the sub I showed, or you can do something a lot heavier. This sub is part of my Roid Rage sample pack, mind you. A lot of high end. Takes up the whole mix. We just took one of these Nasco shots real quick. Now, that by itself, very sharp on the ears, right? But when they're distorted together, and mind you, we'll talk about these EQs in a second, we're going to distort this together rather than separate. It sounds like this. That harshness kind of gets toned down. Now, without these EQs, sounds fucking terrible. Sounds like probably distortion you've tried before, and you're like, how are people blowing up their mixes to sound so well? Well, they're learning what these build-up points are, which in your music you have to understand, like the low mids right past the sub is going to be a pain point, and right in this region here. If I play this, it's going to be a lot of mud. Up here is going to be your hissing. We don't want that higher. And then right here was to the sound here. And the sub was kind of getting blown out because we are distorting it a lot, and it's already being pressed to clipping levels. So I've turned it down a little bit to taste without this one. The sub sounds a little too overwhelming, so I'm just carving it to make the sound I want, right? Now, another cool thing about this is you can choose how much distortion you want, not only by saturating it, which I use digital clip. It just has a little bit more of aggressive of a clip. You can also do this with your sub levels. So you are distorting it together, but if you turn down your sub, watch what happens here. It becomes more low heavy the more sub I add over time. Same thing here. So you have to find a good balance between these two, distort them together, and before the distortion, find your pain points. Usually what's going to be resonant in your sound. There's a lot of buildup here, and always the low mids when you're super distorting, and here for the sound. And that made this. And just like you heard in the track, that is literally the only thing playing except for my kick, snare, rides, and then that's it with the shifter for the sub at one part. But there's no other post-processing, and that's how you get... And that's how you can get really cool distortion. Use it as a sound design technique before you go into your mixing stage, and then you can even graft it more. You can start cutting out to add more layers and all that stuff as well. So I hope this tutorial was simple and straightforward for you to understand.